All right, today we're going to dive into a pretty fascinating scientific investigation. It's a story that takes us to a vital, but really vulnerable coastal ecosystem. We're talking about a hidden world, a silent threat, and a race against time to figure out what the future holds.
And that really gets to the heart of it. What actually happens when the very foundation of an ecosystem starts to buckle under pressure it can't even see? Deep down in the mud, there's this entire world under stress, and the fallout, well, it could ripple all the way to the surface. So let's unpack the plant to solve this mystery.
So let's set the scene. Our story unfolds right here, in the massive estuary system of the Bay of Bengal, right along the coast of Bangladesh. Now this is a super dynamic place where fresh water from the rivers mixes with the salt water of the ocean. But this beautiful, vibrant habitat is on the front lines, and it's facing this enormous, invisible pressure of a warming climate.
So, who are the main characters in this coastal drama? Well, they're probably not the big, flashy animals you're picturing. No, let's meet the ecosystem's real, and I mean real, unsung heroes.
Okay, so the scientific term for these guys is Macrobenthos. Basically, this is the huge community of tiny animals that live down in the mud and the sand. We're talking worms, little clams, crabs, shrimp, all that stuff. They might be small, but make no mistake, they are the absolute foundation of this entire coastal ecosystem.
So why are they such a big deal? Well, think of them as the cleanup crew, processing all the gunk and dead material that sinks to the bottom. They're also the farmers, churning up the sediment and cycling vital nutrients back into the system. And here's the kicker. They're basically the all-you-can-eat buffet at the bottom of the food web. They're the main food source for countless fish and birds. That means the health of local fisheries, which millions of people depend on. It all starts right here, in the mud with these little guys. They're the engine that runs the whole show.
And that, right there, brings us to the central problem. We know these little critters are absolutely essential, but, and this is a big but, there's a massive gap in our knowledge. We have almost no data on how they're actually going to cope as their world gets hotter and hotter.
This quote from the research proposal, man, it just says it all. Without understanding how these foundational species handle heat stress, we are literally flying blind. We have no way to predict how the ecosystem is going to hold up, and we can't design any smart, effective plans to protect it.
So, how in the world do you solve a problem this huge and complex? Well, you do it with a clear, step-by-step plan. The researchers laid out a brilliant three-part investigation to crack this coastal case.
And what's so cool about this is how they break down a really complex project into a simple, logical plan. First, you survey the scene, figure out who lives where. Second, you bring in some key subjects for testing, kind of like an interrogation. And third, you use all that intel to predict the final outcome. It's classic detective work, just with a scientific twist.
Okay, let's dig into those first two steps and see exactly how these clues get gathered, from the murky floor of the estuary all the way to the bright lights of a science lab.
Step 1 is all about reconnaissance, right? The researchers head out to 6 different spots. They grab samples of the mud, the sand, and the water. Then they analyze everything to see who's living there, in what numbers, and they measure all the environmental conditions, temperature, salt levels, oxygen, the works. This basically creates the baseline map for our whole mystery. So, once that map is established, the investigation moves indoors. The researchers carefully pick out 3 species that are really common and do super important jobs, and they become the representatives for the entire community. It's time to put them under the microscope, literally. And here they are, our key subjects. First up, we've got a polychaete worm, which is a bioturbator. It's constantly mixing and adding oxygen to the sediment. Then you've got an insect larva, the detritivore, that's the specialist cleaner, eating all the dead stuff. And finally, a crab, which plays the role of predator and scavenger. See, 3 different species, 3 totally critical jobs. So how do you test them? Well, you build a tiny simulated world right in the lab. These animals are put into tanks with 3 different temperature settings. You have a control group, which is at today's average temperature, then a second group that's 2 degrees warmer, simulating the near future, and a third group that's a full 4 degrees warmer, which is a much more extreme but possible scenario.
And this chart really just lays out what they expect to find. As the temperature goes up, the biological stress on these animals is predicted to go way up too. Now, scientists measure this by looking for these things called biomarkers. Think of them like tiny little alarm bells going off inside the animal's cells. The hotter it gets, the more alarms go off, showing that their bodies are working way overtime just to stay alive.
So you've got all these clues. You have data from the field, you've got stress test results from the lab. What do you do with it all? how do you combine everything to see what might actually happen to the entire ecosystem?
And that brings us to the third and final step, building a predictive model. This is where all the pieces of the puzzle get fed into a computer program. The field data tells the model who lives where. The lab results tell it how each of those species handles the heat. And all the existing knowledge about the food web tells it who eats who.
And what comes out the other side? It's basically a scientific crystal ball. The whole goal is to create a model that can show us how the entire system, the food web, the nutrient cycling, the whole shebang, might change under those different warming scenarios. It helps us peek into the potential futures for the Bay of Bengal.
And that brings us to the big payoff. You might be asking, why go to all this trouble for a bunch of tiny critters in the mud? Why does this specific investigation really truly matter?
Well, for one, it is a huge deal because it's a first. Nobody has ever combined these three approaches, the field surveys, the lab work, and the computer modeling, to understand climate change in this specific, massive, and incredibly important estuary. It's groundbreaking work for this whole region.
And look, this isn't just about writing another scientific paper that sits on a shelf. This knowledge is designed for action. The results can be used to create real, evidence-based plans, like figuring out which areas are most critical to protect, and to develop climate strategies that help safeguard the coastlines of Bangladesh and other similar places all around the world.
Which, leaves us with one final, pretty big thought. The story of the Macrobenthos in the Bay of Bengal is a story of a hidden world that's finally being brought into the light. And it really makes you wonder, how many other invisible ecosystems, these unsung heroes of our planet, are out there right now just counting on science to tell their story before it's too late?